Hello everyone, and welcome to the November 2017 update of the Power BI desktop. We have lots of exciting features to walk you through today, the majority of which are reporting features. So the first feature on our list is a new addition to the conditional formatting experience for table and matrix. We already have the ability to color the background or foreground of your cells based off of a gradient from min to max or values you specify. And we also have the ability to add data bars to your table and matrix. Well, this month we are again adding a new way to do this, which lets you use your own custom business logic to define what colors to color the cells by based off of rules that you define. So let me show you this in action. So I have already created a matrix that's showing my categories and subcategories and the number of units I've already sold. And now I want to be able to color the background of my cells based off of some logic that I defined. And so to do this, I will go to the same place I normally do to conditionally format my chart. I can either go in the formatting pane and choose conditional formatting, or I can go into the flyout for the value in the field well, and from here I can pick conditional formatting and then pick between data bars, font color, and background color. So the addition is for both font color and background color. I now have this new option called color by rules. So by default, it will still auto-populate with the gradient from your min to your max, but I can switch it over to rule-based by checking this box. From here, I can add as many rules as I want. I can either color a cell by a specific color, if it's between two values, or if it's equal to a very specific value, or if the cell is blank, so the value was null. There's no results returned for that row. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to set up my custom logic that as long as it is below 2,000 units sold, it's going to be colored red. And I have a second rule that as long as it's between 2,000 and 4,000, I want that to be considered a yellow color because that's kind of getting okay. And then anything above 4,000 units sold is wonderful, so I'm going to color that green. And then just to show off the is rule, I'm going to also use that one. So I'm going to say if the value is equal to 942, I want that to be colored purple. This also will demonstrate an important thing to know about this dialog, which is the order that these rules are applied. So whenever you have a overlap between two rules, so for example, this is 942, overlaps with the rule that says anything below 2,000, the bottom one is always going to win. We apply the rules top down in order, and anything below it can override the things above it. So once I hit OK, you'll see that because the is rule is last on the list, that's going to be the one that wins, and that cell is going to be colored purple. So you can see now my values on my matrix are colored based off of the specific rules I set. And so this is really powerful for both table and matrix because now the colors can exactly match those defined by your business. And like I mentioned earlier, this also will apply to the conditional formatting you can do on the text color in addition to the background that I showed here. The next feature on our list is yet another addition to our table and matrix visuals. We now let you, for both the headers and the values, be able to control what the cell alignment is. We'll still have the automatic alignment that is trying to be smart based off the value of the cell, so if it's text, left align, and if it's numbers, right align. But if for whatever reason you want to be able to adjust that, you can now do that. So let me show you where. I'm going to take this same matrix, and in the formatting pane, in both the column headers and the row headers, you now have this alignment option. And in this drop down, you can choose between leaving it the auto that is the smart detection, and you can specify left, center, and right alignment. And with the column headers, you can see that right there. It's right now set to right. And I can do the same thing for the row headers. And in this case, I'm going to switch to center. As I mentioned, you can also do this for the values of the cells. To do that, you will go into the field formatting card. And then for each individual column that you have, field that you have showing up in the table or matrix, in my case, this one I only have units, but I'll be able to pick in this drop down any of the ones I have. I can go in and I can adjust the alignment for that specific column. And so in my case, I'm going to left align these numbers, and then as usual, this only applies by default to the values of the cell, but I could choose to override it for things like the headers and the totals as well. So this is just another small formatting capability that we're giving you that allows you to customize the visuals to meet the needs that you have. Next on our list is a new addition to the selection pane. Last month, as part of our bookmarking update, we also released a selection pane that makes it a lot easier to be able to select all the different overlapping objects you have on your report page. It's very common to have a lot of overlapping things if you're trying to create a highly formatted report where you have lots of shapes and images overlapping each other. The selection pane just makes it easier to select those. And it also had a show hide feature so that you could show or hide objects on your page, either through the click of a button or, of course, bookmarking that. This month, we are adding another feature to the selection pane, which is the ability to control the visual ordering through the selection pane. So what this means is if you have two objects overlapping, there's always one showing on top of the other. And through the selection pane, you're now able to easily shift things around in that ordering. So let me show you that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create real quickly a couple of other charts so they can have something to overlap with. This one I will put class, sale size, and sales amount. And I will also create a line chart that shows me order date and my units sold over time. Now I'm going to go open up my View tab, the selection pane. And in here you can see, in addition to the ability to select, like I mentioned we already had, and the show hide icon, you can now see we have these two arrows that lets you move whatever object is currently selected higher up in the Z order. So the things on top are going to be showing up on top, and the things on the further down it goes on the list, the further down it is in the stack. So if I overlap these two things, you can see while right now this chart is on top of the matrix and it's showing there, if I hit the down arrow, it moves behind the matrix. We still show you on hover the object on top, so you're able to easily resize it. But anytime that someone's going to be viewing your report, this is the order that they'll see things whenever they are overlapping. Next up, we have a highly requested feature, which is the ability to lock your objects on your report. So a lot of times, if you use the desktop a lot, you'll create a highly formatted report where everything is positioned just right, and then you just want to do like a quick demo or test it out, and it's really easy when you're cross-highlighting or changing filters to just slightly nudge a visual to the left or to the right, just a little bit. You can now, while you're in editing mode, choose to lock your objects so that they can no longer be resized or moved around. This isn't quite the same as a view mode because it doesn't save with the report and you can still do all of your other authoring things. It's just a nice little feature to let you, as you're quickly demoing or trying out your report, make sure you don't mess with any of your alignment. You also see this new option in the View tab. It's called Lock Objects, and when you turn it on, you can see the little resize handles are gone, and you can no longer drag anything around in your report. You're able to use this feature in both the service and in the desktop, but do remember that, as I mentioned earlier, this does not save as part of your report. So anytime you're going to want to use this feature, just make sure you remember to go and turn it on real quick in the View tab before you start your demo. Next up on our list is an ESRI Plus subscription for ArcGIS maps for Power BI. We are very excited to announce that ESRI is releasing a new subscription service called Plus that enables you to do even more with this data of yours. You're able to get a ton more richer mapping capabilities, including being able to do more street geocoding, up to 5,000 data points per map. You also get more additional base maps. You also get the Living Atlas reference layers. And also in the infographics feature, you're able to now also use world demographics, like education and population. Now this feature is, like I mentioned, a subscription feature. So if you want to use it, you will need to sign up with ESRI to pay $5 a month per user who wants to be able to view the map. But you can try it out if you're interested for 60 days at no charge. And of course, all of the normal free features that we've had with our map are still available for you to use, no change at all to those. So let me show you how to get started. So I'm going to start on my same report. And let me just move a few things out of the way. Close the selection pane. And minimize this a little bit. Great, now I have some room, and I'm going to add the ESRI map to my report. And I'm going to add my countries that I sell into the location bucket. And I want to also color that by the average sales amount in that country. Now in here, I see by default my normal ESRI map, but I now also have this little plus icon in the top right. And this is where you're going to go to both sign up and sign in once you have an account. You can also, of course, click on this Learn More link to be taken to ESRI's site to learn more about all the different features you can get and the subscription service in general. I've already signed up, so I'm just going to click Sign In. Now, you'll see that once you click Sign In, you will need to authenticate. And I'm just going to move this out of the way as I finish my sign up process. And once you finish the sign in process, you now can use in ESRI all of the new Plus features. And you'll be able to find all of these in the editing mode for ESRI. So I'm going to go in and edit it. And now whenever I open base maps, I can see, in addition to the standard dark gray and light gray and all the ones we had, you can see these new options, the little plus next to it. Now, anytime there's an ESRI Plus feature, you'll see this icon next to it. And I can, of course, click it, and I can see that that base map is now applied. As mentioned, there is now tons of new base maps that you can use with the subscription. My favorite is this National Geographic one. I'm quite a fan of this one. You can also now use in the reference layers. You'll see this Living Atlas option. And in here you can add any of the different reference layers from here as a plus feature. And lastly, you'll see in the infographics section, in addition to the US demographics, you also now have world demographics. And there are tons of different options in here. You can see so many things around policies, what people are spending their money on. If I drill into, say, apparel and services, you can see apparel and services is one option, but I can also see in household services, how much are they spending in healthcare. And now you can see in the little infographics section, I can see all the different demographics information. So as you can see, with the ESRI Plus, you have much richer mapping capabilities available to you. And we're very excited to be able to offer this to you. And if, like I said earlier, there is a 60-day no-charge trial that you can try out if you're just curious about these features and want to see if they're good for you. Next up on our list, we have some report options if you are connecting to slow data sources. If you are working with either a very large or very slow data source, which can be frequent whenever you're using direct query, some actions can take a while to get a response from the underlying data source. So to help with that, we're giving you some more options in the report to send fewer queries back to the source, which makes it a lot easier to interact with the report. These options include disabling cross-highlighting by default for all charts, and also adding an apply button to both slicers and filters so that you can decide when you're done making changes and are ready to send that filter back to the source. Before I show you these options, I'm going to just add a slicer to my report so that I can demonstrate it. So I'm just going to add a color field here, and I'm going to change that into a drop-down slicer. And I'm also just going to remove this ESRI visual just to give me a little more room to demonstrate these features. Okay, so now that I have my report how I want, I'm going to go in and I'm going to, under File, Options and Settings, Options. In this dialog, the very last option under Current File, you see Query Reduction. This is where you'll see all the different options we have available for you for your slow data sets. So I'm just going to turn on all three that I mentioned earlier, disabling cross-highlighting by default, and an apply button for both slicers and filters. And I'm going to hit OK. And automatically, all those changes are applied. So as I mentioned, cross-highlighting is now disabled by default. So when I click on a value in any of the charts, they do not cross-highlight. Of course, I can still go in through my visual interactions and enable it for specific use cases. So if there's really only one chart that's really important to cross-highlight by, I can go and I can turn that cross-highlighting on for that one chart while leaving the rest of the default off. You can also see that there is now an apply button for this slicer. So as I make changes to the drop-down, clicking different fields or control clicking, no filters are actually being applied quite yet. You'll see that the button has lit up in yellow, and once I'm done, once I've cleared the things that I no longer want to filter by and add my new filters in, then I hit apply, and those filters will automatically get applied. The same is true in our filter pane. So if I wanted to, for example, filter to two of the three sale sizes, I can make my selection changes here, but it won't get applied until I click on this apply filter option down at the bottom of the card. And once I do that, my filters are now applied to this chart. These small changes can really make a difference whenever you're interacting with your report, especially whenever you're using slicers and filters and you want to be able to select multiple things at one time. If you didn't have this apply button, clicking each and individual one would take a little bit of time as we run the queries for that individual selection you're making. So if you are using direct query with a slow data source, be sure to check out these options and see if they help with your report. The next bullet point is just a note around some performance improvements we made for filtering. We've recently made some improvements to our filtering implementation behind the scenes, and it doesn't change anything in terms of your experience, other than the fact that now there has been some performance improvements, especially whenever you are using strings filters. You'll definitely see some quicker filtering occurring. Because of this, we've also removed our 500 value limit on how many values you can match for all sources except for using Live Connect to analysis services. Next on my list are some recent custom visuals that have come out that I would like to share with you. The first being the image timeline. So the image timeline custom visual is all about displaying events along a horizontal timeline. Then you can use these events to filter down the rest of your report. Each individual event is represented on a horizontal line as either a custom image that you specify or a circle. And it also has this nice brush effect that lets you zoom in on certain ranges of dates within the entire timeline to make it easier to select. So let me show you the sample for this visual. So this view is showing you the timeline of all the US presidents and what state they came from. And so I can hover over a given president, such as Theodore Roosevelt, and filter down to just him. And you can see since these all have images associated with it in the field well, I'm seeing all of the different pictures of the presidents. But if I didn't have an image associated with it, they would be individual dots. This dataset is also good to demonstrate the brush effect. Because there's been so many US presidents, it can be kind of hard to narrow in on an individual one. So you're able to, using the ends of this gray bar, narrow down the scope that you want to look at. So you can narrow down on it, and you can also drag it. Once you've gotten it small enough, you can start dragging it to help narrow in on the timeline the area of the timeline you're interested in for cross highlighting. You can also, once you've gotten it small enough, you can see this little crosshair. You can just click and drag to be able to create your own focused view of the timeline. So this is a very beautiful visual that is also very interactive. So I definitely recommend, if you do have events happening over time, to try out this custom visual. Next up is the social network graph. And this custom visual is all about visualizing connections between people. So a common scenario for this is visualizing an organizational structure where employees report to managers who then report to other managers, and you have this kind of organizational hierarchy. And so to create this visual, you'll give it the source and the target for each connection. So you say, you put in a field for who's reporting to who, and then you can, of course, format it with extra things like size and color of the different dots within the network graph. The sample for this visual is actually demonstrating that exact scenario I ran through of an organizational structure. So you can see in the center here is a guy named Paul, and he's the CEO of this company. And reporting to him are a couple of different people like Matt and Eve, and each of them have different people reporting to them as well. And they are also colored by the department that they are coming from, and you can even see it also does things like you can put in this extra info bucket down in the bottom of the field well. You can also put in extra stuff you want to show in the tooltip. So as I hover over each person's name, I can also see what their job title is. The size of the circles is currently being correlated by salary, but of course you can change that as well. So anytime you have this kind of graph forming where there's a bunch of interconnections between a bunch of people, this is definitely a good visualization to try out. My next visual that I wanted to talk about is the Venn diagram by Mock Software. So Venn diagrams are all around finding commonality between different categories. So each circle on a Venn diagram is a collection of data points that represent that given category, and where each of the different circles overlap, that's where data points exist that represent both individual categories. In the demo data set that we have for the Venn diagram, each of them talks about different courses that different students are taking. So you can see from this table that there are around 1,500 students who are taking both math and science, and you can see that exact number here in the overlap between the circle for science and math. So this visual is really good if you have a bunch of interconnected categories and you want to see how much overlap there is between them. You can definitely use this Venn diagram custom visual to help you see that information. The last custom visual I want to talk about this month is the HTML viewer. This visual is a little bit different than the previous ones. It's all around being able to take your HTML text strings and being able to visualize those in its original formatting. An example where you might have these is if you are pulling in your rich text columns from SharePoint. In Power BI, there's no really good way to show that in its original formatting. Using this visual, you can do that. So the first page of this sample is actually a great example of this. You can see from this table what the data originally came in as. It's a bunch of HTML tags mixed in with text. And of course, in our table, we don't visualize that the way you would expect it to be represented. So the HTML view is all about actually treating that almost like a little mini web page and actually rendering the HTML formatting. So if things are marked as a header, they show up as a header. If things are marked strong, they are visualized strong. So it's taking all that HTML content that you have and actually rendering it as HTML instead of as text like we do in Power BI. Moving on to our analytics feature for this month, we are extending our cell level formatting for multidimensional AS models to work also in multi-row card. Last month, we released this feature for table, matrix, and single value cards, and we just didn't have quite enough time to wrap it up for multi-row cards. So this month we are finishing up that scenario, and if you have defined in your multidimensional analysis services model cell level formatting, that will just automatically flow through into your multi-row card along with the other visuals I mentioned and be applied to your values. For data connectivity, our improvement this month is that our Impala connector now supports Windows authentication. This is a very common request from existing Impala connector users. And next month, we will also be adding support for Windows authentication for on-premise data gateway, along with a couple of other improvements. The last feature that I want to talk about is in addition to a query editing feature that we have called Add Column from Example. We've had this feature for several months now. It is all around being able to create new columns in your query without having to know about all the different buttons and interactions in the query editor. All you have to do is type in a few examples of what you want your new column to look like, and we will just figure out the rest. We'll figure out what transformations to apply, what needs to get done, and we'll just create that column for you. We have, with this new update to that feature, there's a lot of additional scenarios now opened up. You can do some basic conditional columns, so being able to define some mapping between values. So, for example, a common one is if there's an acronyms, you have a common bunch of acronyms, you can create a mapping of that to the full spelled out version of the words. You can also do conditional column ranges so that you can define non-uniform ranges based off of the input column. So this is something like if a value is less than or equal to a number, then I want that column to be positive, or if it's greater than or less than 0, that should be negative. things like that. That kind of like uneven ranges that you can set. You can now do that through the column by example feature. Another common scenario people use the conditional column button in the query editor for is being able to have a fallback for null values. So if there is some null values in your dataset, you can replace those really easily with things like NA for not applicable, or replace it with a 0 if that's what you want it to be treated as. You're able to now do that also through the column by example feature. Last but not least, we're also enabling bucketing via this feature. So if you have very specific values and you want to map those to ranges, so you want to create one column that says like -20 to -10, 0 to 20, all these different ranges, you want to create one column that has that range label. You're able to also do that in the column from example feature. So I know I gave you a lot of examples, and it's probably hard to visualize, so I'm going to go and actually demo one of these scenarios for you. So I'm going to start by opening up the query editor, and you'll find the column from examples button under the add column tab. And I can either choose to just click it and be able to create new column space of all of my data, or if I want to focus in on just one specific column, let's say units, I can select it and say I want to add a column from example from my selection. And now all of the different autocomplete that's going to happen is totally based off of just this column. So I'm going to go in and start filling this out. So I know that if it's 1 or 2, it's going to be small, 3 is a medium, and anything greater than a 4 is a large cell. So I'm just going to go in and start filling in some examples. So I know 2 is small. Fill in the next 2 as well. And since I've only filled in 2s, it now thinks that the column should just be small, which kind of makes sense considering it's all I filled in. But I know that a 4 and larger is large. And as I continue to fill in more of these, I'm able to start auto-completing my column. So now I can see by filling this in, it says if the unit is greater than 4, then it's large, else small. That's what it's figured out so far from what I've typed in. And as I continue to type in just different examples, it becomes smarter and smarter and gets more precise in what I was trying to do. And once I'm happy with my results, I can just hit OK. And it'll automatically create that column for me, adding the step that would have also resulted in that same type of column. And so this is not only just a quick way to create new columns, but also a learning tool as well, because you can figure out, if I wanted to do that manually, where would I go in the UI, what type of, if I'm interested in M, what type of encode would have been involved, and I can kind of start to learn more about how the query editor works through this feature as well. So that's all the features for this month. Let us know what you think in the comments, and also let us know what features you would like to see added to Power BI in our next release.